Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. It's 4:30. Do we have quorum? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Great. Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Do we have any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we're going to move forward to the scheduled items with 2.1 with Mrs. Ramsey, the project director. Go ahead, Jenny.
Actually, through the chair, if you give us 2 seconds, I've got a version that doesn't show 2 slides on the screen at the same time, which might be a little confusing.
Take all the time you need.
Okay, there we go, much better. So good afternoon, everybody. It's been a while since we last met, so I'm happy to be here today to be able to bring you up to speed on where we're at and to answer any of your questions. So there's a fair bit to catch you up on today. What I'll make sure to do is that we have some time after the presentation to answer any questions, and there's a point in the middle where I'll pause because it's sort of a good break to be able to, again, answer questions on the first half. But as you know, the project is currently in the formal consultation period of the transit project assessment process. So I'd like to fill you in on the work we've been doing to get feedback from residents, business owners, agencies and ministries, and other stakeholders. We recently paused this phase to strengthen our heritage strategy, and I'm going to give you an update on our status there and our plan for going forward, along with some other project developments that have received a little less attention. For example, since we last met, an independent safety audit has been completed, and we've had some positive news on that front. I also want to keep you posted on upcoming events and milestones that we're working toward. We're still on course to coordinate construction with other work downtown set to start in 2020, and I'll tell you about that. Later in the presentation, I'll give you an update on Quick Start and outline some of the options being considered for bringing the BRT project to market. Finally, I'll hand it over to LTC for an update on their integration strategy. So I thought it might be helpful to begin with a bit of a refresher on the Transit Project Assessment Process, or TPAP. I'm going to use TPAP from now on just to save my poor twisted tongue. But because it's been a while since our last update, kind of remind ourselves of what's involved in TPAP. So essentially, it's required for all major transportation projects in Ontario, and it has 3 stages. On May 8th, 2018, London City Council approved the draft environmental project report to begin the 120-day period of formal consultation, which is the first of the 3 phases. The purpose of this period is to allow members of the public, stakeholders, and provincial government agencies time to review and submit feedback on the project report. During this stage, the BRT team held a series of events that aimed to give Londoners multiple opportunities to submit input and feedback on the project report. And since the purpose of this period is also to get provincial government feedback, we were also having discussions with representatives from various agencies and ministries. The second stage of TPAP is a 30-day public comment period. During that phase, members of the public can submit formal objection to the project if they have grounds to believe that it could impact a matter of provincial importance, which could include things like heritage, environmentally sensitive areas, or First Nation treaty rights. And then finally, the third phase of TPAP is a 35-day review by the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. In terms of gathering feedback, we started by hosting 2 open houses at the Central Library and then moved into drop-in style Transit Tuesday events throughout the summer at our office. More than 250 people signed into these 12 events, which were an opportunity to come in, talk one-on-one with the team while going over plans and renderings. There are a few recurring themes that came out of the comments we heard through those sessions, such as the BRT system should prioritize pedestrian safety and accessibility, that there's a need for strong integration between the BRT system and cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. We heard it's important to ensure effective snow clearing measures for accessibility purposes, and that the project should prioritize protecting trees and green spaces. So those are some of the common themes that we got from the public that came out. To complement those 12 consultation opportunities, we also set up a series of information booths in communities across the city, in libraries and malls and community centers. At those booths, we were able to talk to members of the public right in their own community. And then for people that couldn't make it out to any of those events, we also launched an interactive map that you could use to explore the entire BRT network and submit comments along the way. The map was also a great tool for feedback. Between June and September, the page was loaded more than 44,000 times and received more than 270 comments. I think it's important to note that public and stakeholder feedback throughout this TPAP period has been effective. In many cases, the BRT team has refined the design to reflect feedback that we heard from the public. Some examples. In response to the cycling community, bike lanes and multi-use paths were extended in some key locations where it was possible, and cycling connections were added at most signalized intersections. A lane of general traffic on King Street was extended to go right through the Wellington Street intersection and continue for 2 blocks all the way to Colborne. That was a pretty significant design change that'll help get people out of the downtown core. And we also looked at turning lane locations, and we adjusted some on Dundas Street to optimize access in that constrained corridor. So we shifted a location of a left turn or 2. As I mentioned, the consultation period is also designed to gather feedback from various provincial ministries and agencies that have a say in matters such as noise and vibration, air quality, stormwater management, and archaeological impacts that BRT may affect. That includes municipal advisory committees on subjects like heritage, the environment, cycling, and accessibility, as well as First Nation consultation in the region. And consultation with provincial ministries was also involved. We sent the draft report to all relevant ministries, and in most cases, they were satisfied with their plans and mitigation strategies. Of the comments we did receive, most only asked for minor tweaks to the study, and we were able to make the necessary changes to receive sign-off. The one area where it was identified that there was a need for further information at this time was relating to cultural heritage. Through conversations with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport, we decided last month to pause the TPAP process. This decision allows us to provide more detailed heritage information on properties that will be directly impacted by BRT before we enter that 30-day public comment period. So I'll give you a detailed update on our heritage plans in a moment, but first I wanted to highlight another important piece of the work that we've completed during this phase of the project, and that's the independent safety audit. So back in September of 2017, we had identified the need for a safety audit as part of our project management plan for the environmental assessment. The sole purpose of this audit is to provide an independent safety-focused review of the BRT preliminary design. So the audit is not intended to make recommendations from a planning or an operational perspective, or confirm compliance with design standards. The goal is to identify opportunities to enhance the overall safety of the system. So the audit reviewed the overall route safety, as well as the safety of transit users, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. We provided the audit consultants with all design drawings to complete a preliminary review. They also visited the routes to gain a first-hand understanding of existing conditions, and then interviewed the team about the rationale and different decision choices. The final road safety audit, completed in accordance with the Canadian Road Safety Guide, identified a range of possible safety enhancements. So some of the examples of things that we've changed as a result of suggestions coming from that audit is tightening up some of the curb radiuses around some of our corners. What that does is it shortens the crossing length for pedestrians. It also reduces the speed of vehicles as they're turning around those corners. We identified some areas where we could extend center medians to provide pedestrians with refuge in areas where the crossing distance for pedestrians is a little bit longer. And then we identified some potential conflict points between modes of transportation and tried to find ways to ease those potential conflicts. So through TPAP, we've made many of these changes have been incorporated into our design. A lot of them are small tweaks, but tweaks that again will help to enhance the safety of the overall system. Now, as you probably heard, we've been doing a lot of work on the heritage front, so I wanted to give you an update on that now. Now, I think it's important to note that heritage work has always been embedded in our plans, and a lot of heritage work has already been done during the development of the Rapid Transit Master Plan and in the pre-planning phases. So we've been collaborating with the London Advisory Committee on Heritage, or LATCH, which has helped to ensure that our work has been thorough and comprehensive. What this timeline shows or highlights is LATCH's involvement throughout the project so far and reflects how heritage has played an important role in the development of our BRT designs. I'm not going to take you through all the details, but as you can see, we brought forward our cultural heritage screening report first to LATCH back in February. And then we came back to them in September because we wanted to inform LATCH that based on our ongoing consultation with the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, that we would be updating that screening report in order to provide some additional information. So we've now expanded that cultural heritage screening report. I don't expect you to read this slide, but what I want to do is illustrate how the tables have been expanded in our screening report as it stands now. So in addition to a description of each of the fully impacted properties, the table now clearly describes the potential impact and recommended options for mitigation. Plus it includes a photo, which says so much. I think like many of you, I know some of these properties or recognize them just from looking at the photo. So it really adds context to the table itself. And again, heritage work has always been part of our plans. However, originally, we had planned to dive into the extremely detailed heritage assessments after TPAP. In our conversations with the ministry this summer, it became clear that there was a need for more detailed heritage evaluation on directly impacted properties during the TPAP window. And so as a result, we paused that consultation phase to do these detailed evaluations within TPAP rather than after it. And indirectly impacted properties, those can still be evaluated in the next phase where they're required. So based on our expanded cultural heritage screening report, 48 properties have been identified that require detailed heritage evaluations to be completed during the TPAP phase. So this map shows the location of the 48 properties that will undergo further evaluation in order to better understand the heritage value, potential interest, impacts, and the appropriate mitigation measures. Given the large number of properties that have potential for impact, the ministry recommended that it was possible to group some adjacent properties where it was appropriate if the properties had similarity in style, age, design, context, typology, or impact. And so we've taken that advice, and you can see from this slide that we've grouped. We have two groupings, a grouping of 5 properties on Richmond, a grouping of 35 properties along Wellington South, and then we have another 7 individual CHERs where those properties, it didn't make sense to group them in with a larger grouping. The project team will complete the cultural heritage screening reports for these 48 projects or properties, and then we'll continue to report back to LATCH prior to restarting the TPAP process. Now, based on the scope of this work, and as you can see from this timeline, our plan is to complete that additional heritage work by the end of March of 2019, and that's when we're aiming to restart the clock. So as you can see here, what we've tried to do is illustrate our TPAP timeline. On the right of the screen is before we put the pause on the left of the screen is before we put the pause on the right of the screen is after the pause. And so what we wanted to illustrate that the pause is not expected to have an impact on our overall project timeline. So the city's always been committed to ensuring heritage impacts were appropriately considered and addressed, and so that hasn't changed. What has been adjusted, however, is the sequence when we were planning to do the work. As you can see on the left of the screen, the heritage work outlined today was originally planned to start after that first phase of TPAP. So there's sort of the brackets there show you how the heritage work was planned originally and how it doesn't move when we look at the right side of the screen. So if you look at the right, you see that the bracket representing that heritage work, the timing hasn't changed. We're still starting that work in the fall, but by pausing TPAP, we can document the results now in our final environmental project report. So as this timeline shows, we expect BRT construction to still begin on schedule in 2020 as originally planned. So that was a fair bit of information. That was sort of what we've been doing during the TPAP process in a nutshell. And I thought maybe this would be a good opportunity to see if you had any questions on that information before we maybe move into some of the work that we're doing to prepare for 2019.
So if there's any questions, I'll start with Councillor Usher, then Councillor Squire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Jenny. A couple of quick questions. The dates. I don't know the dates just by looking at these, except that you just mentioned the construction start in 2020. So I know that that's shadowed down there. But can you help me out for the public's sake and for mine? These 120 days and the 30 days and the 30 days, when do they start and when do they end? I'm sure I could find it somewhere else, but looking at this right now, I don't remember what they are. So the 130 days, the 120 days, when does that end? Is it ended now?
So through the chair, the 120 days started in June when we initiated the TPAP formal consultation. And then what happened was in October, we put a pause on that 120-day timeline. I think we were on day 116. And so that's where we're currently paused right now. So we've paused that so we could do the additional heritage evaluation and then reflect that information within our final report. Once through our discussions with Latch and the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, once through those discussions we've confirmed that we've addressed the scope that they're looking for to be included, then we will restart that clock, complete the last 4 days of the 120 before we move into the 30-day public comment period and then 35 days for the Minister's review. And so we're sort of, as I mentioned, we've paused the clock on the 120 days to complete that additional work.
So my follow-up question to that question is, this 30-day public review on the right side, when will that start? And the 30-day ministry review. And you mentioned 35 just now. Is this 30, change to 35?
Yes, I just noticed there is a slight misprint on the slides. It's a 30-day public review period, and then the minister has 35 days to make a decision on any comments received during the 30-day period. And so as far as when the 30 days will start, going forward, we will restart the clock after the heritage work is completed. Then we still have 4 days left on the 120 days to wrap up. After that point, that's when the 30-day comment period will be starting. On the day that we reach the 120th day and start the 30-day comment period, we will be publishing a final version of the environmental project report online and in hard copy at all libraries so that there's access to that document to review the final version, which includes all of the feedback and adjustments that we've made over the 120 days.
So I'm not getting my answer. I'm looking for a date. Is it the end of January? Is it the end of June? Do you know? If you don't know right now, that's fine. I'm just looking at some time in 2019 when these dates are there.
So our target is the end of March to complete all the heritage work. So if we started the clock back up then we'd have basically the month of April would be the 30 days of public comment period, and the month of May would essentially be the minister's review period. So it would be pretty much right around the end of May when the minister's decision would align.
Okay, that helps. My other question is, you use the word pause for the TPAP, and that seemed to confuse a lot of people. It's almost as though we stop, we're not doing anything. And you explain it, but to the public out there, when I'm seeing this whole picture, through you, Madam Chair, the word pause means that we're not doing anything, and the minister stopped us. Is there a better word that we could use rather than pause? I don't like the word delay, I don't like pause, because it sounds as though we stopped, but we haven't stopped. We just pulled something from up here and bring it up there, and we are continuing the work that has to be done. you did say, through you, Madam Chair, that everything will be, as far as start of construction, we're gonna hit that timeline, but it's just the word pause that confused a lot of people. Is there another word that we could have used or could still use?
I'm not sure, we could look for maybe some other language. We were using the language that's typically used by the Ministry of Environment when they're speaking about that process. The second part of my presentation, though, is actually to fill you in on the other work that's continuing while we're doing that heritage work in preparation for moving the project forward. So really, all the other ministries that we've heard back, they've commented that they've signed off on the different reports that they were reviewing. We've also incorporated the public feedback and all the other input that we've received from agencies. So the report is pretty much ready to go. We just need to wrap up this additional heritage work, incorporate it, and then restart that clock. In the meantime, there's other work that the group is working on that I'm going to update you on in the second half of the presentation. So things are still moving. We're not really, the office is literally not paused. There's lots still going on.
And I really, really appreciate that. I just wanted to bring out to the public that, hey, we haven't stopped work. This thing is not stopped. We still have people working on it. It's just a matter of moving things so that we could get this response done. So thank you very much. I'll come back with other questions later on.
Councillor Squire.
Through you, Madam Chair, I hope you'll understand. I'm having difficulty understanding. You use a general term, heritage work, and it's really hard for me at this point in time to understand what that means. I don't understand. Does that mean properties with a particular legal heritage status, whether it's on the heritage list or designated as heritage properties, has been identified as somehow being affected by construction, and now you're looking at them to see if you can mitigate the effects on them, you can eliminate the effects on them? It's really hard for me to understand what the work is that you're doing.
Absolutely. Through the chair, I tried to boil things a little bit down and not be as detailed as it was at Latch, but I'm happy to walk you through. There's really sort of 3 stages of heritage. The first thing you do is screen for heritage. And so there's criteria that will identify whether a property has the potential to have heritage value or interest. Typically, it's things like, is the property older than 40 years old? Are there certain features to the property? Is it part of a certain district where the area itself has cultural heritage relevance? So it looks at those different things. It looks at fire insurance records, mapping, to kind of figure out, just at a first flush, which of the properties along the corridor have the potential to have heritage. Whether they're listed on the municipal registry or not, it's just doing a full sweep for any potential. And then what we've been doing is the next step is, if there's the potential identified, you do a cultural heritage evaluation. So you dig a little deeper. You go back to land title records, to when it was on Crown land ownership. Who are the previous people that have owned that property? It looks into greater detail at the relationship of that property and its features within the overall surrounding setting. So those are those cultural heritage evaluation reports. That's the more detailed evaluation that we had planned to do following TPAP, that our screening report identified where we needed to do those reports, and we're going to do them later. So out of our discussions with the ministry, they've asked that for any properties where, as a result of the construction, those buildings are going to be fully impacted, they'd like us to do that evaluation to determine whether there is or is not heritage potential as part of TPAP now. So those are the work that we're doing. We're doing 48 of those cultural heritage evaluation reports within the TPAP bubble. If any of those 48 reports identify that there is heritage value or interest, then moving forward, they will recommend to do a heritage impact assessment. And that's when you look in specific detail at a property, what the impacts are to the property, and then provide recommendations for how to mitigate those properties. So mitigation to an impacted property could be a number of things, from commemoration to documentation, right up to some more intensive measures to potentially shift, move, or reconstruct or commemorate elements of the building. And so that's what the heritage impact assessment, the third evaluation, provides those recommendations. So it's sort of a 1, 2, 3 step process. First, screen to see if there's potential. Second, see if there is value. And then third, see if that value can be mitigated and provide recommendations for that. So what we've done is brought some of that phase 2 work into TPAP for the properties that are directly impacted.
If I could just follow up then, I just want to understand. So let's say you do this and the ministry says, you know what, there's a lot of heritage properties here affected. We're not happy with that. We don't want to see that happen. I want to know what could happen, because there seems to be an assumption here that at the end of this process, you'll have a solution and the ministry will be happy and we'll just carry on. I'm trying to figure out what the ministry's looking for and what they might look for from us if they're not happy with a building going down. Because I'm just looking at it from my point of view as a counselor for Ward 6. You've said, well, there's one property on Richmond Street North that's going to be impacted that has some heritage element to it, which potential heritage. And people in that area will want to know that. So I just want to know what we're going to be getting back at the end, what the public is going to be getting back at the end, so they know this has been considered and it's been evaluated whether these buildings should be saved and we shouldn't be going the step of tearing them down or whatever we're doing.
Through the chair, and our strategy for our TPAP process was to do a screening report, and that in many cases is usually what you see in other TPAP processes, except the issue is when you have the directly impacted properties, that's when the ministry would like to see that additional information to evaluate and identify the actual heritage value or not as part of this process. So looking back to other examples of TPAPs in other cities, what you see is that once that heritage value has been identified, you typically see that they recommend options for mitigation and that those options be determined through a future HIA, or Heritage Impact Assessment, which typically happens after the TPAP process. So again, that was part of our work plan to account for that there would be a certain number of properties that would require HIAs. We budgeted for that, and the plan is to do that after the TPAP process. Again, I can't suppose what the results of our evaluation reports are going to be or what the recommendations for mitigation are going to be. But again, that's something that we continue to work with Latch and with the ministry going forward throughout the process.
So if at the end of you've done your work and it goes to the ministry and the ministry comes back and says, you know what, we want you to do this further step. We're still concerned. We want you to spend more time. Does that affect your timeline? Or are you assuming in your timeline that they're going to say, thank you very much for that work, carry on?
At this point, the scope of work that we've established, we've done that in consultation with MTCS so that we've chosen the work that they'd like to see, and that's what we've set our work plan for during TPAP to do. So based on the results of that, we've been, again, as each CHER is being developed, we'll be passing that on to them to get their feedback, and our goal is to kind of work through this process and to kind of restart based on a work plan that we've come up with together to get to that March goal.
You're welcome. Councillor Huber? Okay, Councillor Park?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Ms. Ramsey, I wonder if the ministry actually gave a rationale why they wanted this deep dive at this stage of the game, recognizing that when most other municipalities go through a project to this degree, they're not really getting that information, as you even said, throughout this process. So I was just curious if we received any rationale as to why London's different and why we needed this deep dive at this point.
And through the chair, I think what we've seen is that the TPAP process has been evolving over the 8 years that it's been in place. And so you looked at early TPAPs and screening reports was all that was required. Then you look at some of the other TPAPs that have happened more recently. They're in areas like Mississauga, where many of the routes that they're studying don't have a single property greater than 40 years old. And so there's other aspects or elements. You know, in the case of London, we are a very heritage-heavy city. We have narrow right-of-ways, and so we've naturally got a large volume that have hit that potential mark that are slated to be fully impacted. And so I think just given the scale that has been triggered as a potential and an impacted property, they wanted to see that work done in advance.
Any further questions? No? Okay, let's carry on to the second half.
So as we're looking forward, again, we wanted to express the fact that there's still lots going on with the project and lots of work to do to be prepared for what's coming in the next year. So as we've been wrapping up the environmental assessment, the project team is already laying the groundwork for important items for the coming year. And so I wanted to fill you in on what's happening on 3 fronts. First on Quick Start, also construction coordination, and then procurement options. So we recognize that we're about to transition into a new council, and so our team is continuing to move forward with this key project work so that we can support the future decision making, recognizing that all major project decisions will continue to be brought forward to council. So we're just continuing to move along on that path, and then anything we bring forward will go through council approval. In the Rapid Transit Master Plan, Quick Start was originally conceived as a way to give Londoners a taste of BRT and build excitement before constructing the main BRT routes. Early Quick Start ideas involved longer stop spacing, reduced headways, and some local intersection improvements such as queue-jump lanes. Over the past year, we've also explored other quick start options, such as building a prototype stop or constructing a short stretch of the corridor. But the more we investigated the options, we found they didn't hold up from a construction feasibility or a cost-benefit perspective. Efficient use of resources, minimizing social impacts, and getting the best value for our money are our top priority. And as we examined the options, it became clear that these early elements of BRT would also result in throwaway costs and unnecessary construction without really benefiting Londoners. So for example, we were looking at adding a prototype stop at King and Wellington. But when we looked into that, that would have impacted underground utilities, which would have driven construction into Wellington Road and possibly the intersections at King and Dundas. And both of those intersections are already slated for construction in 2020 and 21. And then we'd be coming through for the Wonderland stretch of the couplet a couple of years later. So really, we'd be, logistically, it's kind of like, as soon as you do anything that digs underground and starts impacting utilities, it's almost like that string in your sweater that you start to pull it and it's sort of, the sweater becomes unraveling. And that's what we were looking at. We looked originally when we were thinking about ideas to do even queue-jump lanes as part of an operational quick start. We needed to find areas where we didn't need property and there weren't a lot of utility impacts. And to be honest, there's not a lot of opportunities like that along the corridor. And rather than spend money trying to make sure we get one of those elements out early, we'd rather focus our attention on being ready and being able to maybe expand the scope of work that we can fit in with construction coordination or coordinated construction in 2020. So we know that some people might be a little bit disappointed that we weren't able to showcase some exciting new elements of BRT for next year, but ultimately the efficient use of resources and getting the best value for our money is our top priority. We're still on track for shovels in the ground in 2020. This simply means that we'll be looking at other lower impact ways to get the ball rolling on BRT. Now, BRT construction, as I said, is expected to begin downtown to align with work on King Street. The work on King Street is already scheduled to happen in 2020 and 2021. Coordinating construction of BRT just means restoring the road based on BRT rather than existing conditions. So our goal is to go in once and to do it right. We are already looking at other opportunities to align with other planned underground works, such as on Clarence and on Wellington, because there's significant cost savings in coordinating works. And we've heard very clearly from the public as well that reducing construction impacts is a top priority for them. So basically for the first 2 years, BRT construction is able to piggyback on other already scheduled work, which in addition to providing efficiencies and minimizing social impact, allows time for BRT to select and initiate its own procurement model in time to continue construction solo in 2022. This window will provide us time to be able to have a thorough and transparent review of procurement options. So I wanted to kind of walk you through and sort of give a primer of what we've been doing to educate ourselves on the different procurement options going forward. The truth is that each of those major project delivery systems has its advantages and its disadvantages. The relationships, roles, and responsibilities of the parties involved vary considerably between each of the models. So selecting a preferred procurement model to construct London's BRT network is an important decision that needs to weigh several factors. So project size, legislative and regulatory requirements, tolerance for risk, desire for schedule adherence versus cost adherence, local market knowledge, and the desired level involvement of the owner or the city in terms of decision-making once the project starts. The Rapid Transit Office is working with Infrastructure Ontario on a value for money assessment that looks at the different procurement models. We've also completed a really informative market sounding exercise where we interviewed multiple contractors, large, small, local, international, to hear their thoughts on our project and how they might approach it. We're continuing to gather as much information as we can to support a well-rounded, informed decision. It's really about finding the right fit for this project and for Londoners. So there's a broad spectrum of construction delivery models to choose from, especially when dealing with such a major project. But right off the start, we can rule out contract models that involve an operations or a maintenance component. We know that London's BRT network will function as an integrated system operated by LTC. We also know that all of our BRT routes run along existing arterial roads, and maintenance will continue to be performed by city road operation crews. So that allows us to focus on the far left of the spectrum for delivery models. So our review is focusing on 3 procurement models. Each model takes a different approach to how the project is designed, how it's built, and how it's financed. In the design bid build, that's the traditional form of contract administration used by the City of London for its roadway projects. In this model, the owner, aka the city, procures and manages separate contracts for the design and the construction of the project. So basically, we design, then we bid or tender, and then we build. The CMGC, or Construction Manager General Contractor, I also like to refer to as what is sometimes called as early contractor engagement. This process allows the city to engage a construction manager during the design process to provide constructability input. During the design phase, that construction manager provides input regarding scheduling, pricing, phasing, and other aspects that will help the owner design a more constructible project, helping to reduce some of the project risks. And then the third model we're looking at is more of the AFP model, alternate financing procurement. So in the design build finance model, the design and the construction are completed by the same company based on a highly prescribed project specifications that's developed by the city through the procurement process. Finance and schedule risks are typically transferred to the project consortium, who hands the new infrastructure back to the city at the end of the project once everything's complete. So each of those 3 models has the risk lying in a slightly different area, has the control of the project lying in a different area, and it's about finding what's the right fit for London. So as I mentioned, there are advantages and disadvantages to each of the project. I included this table in the presentation. I wasn't going to spend a bunch of time going through it in detail, but I wanted to provide it to the working group to be able to give you sort of a primer of some of the main pros and cons. And again, you've got the 3 again on the spectrum. You know, from a design bid build, it's well understood. We're good at doing this. We do, millions of dollars worth of road constructions under this process every year. And so it's something that we know and we're very familiar with. Whereas you move to the far end of the spectrum with the design build finance, this is something that some larger projects are going with, and we're seeing it in other rapid transits, but it's very different in the sense that you set project specifications, they need to be really clear, but then once it moves over to the project consortium, you have to hope that you got those project specifications right on, because you almost hand the keys over a little bit and then look to get the product back at the end of the project. So it's about finding the right comfort level and the right fit. What are our interests? What are our needs as a city in terms of schedule adherence, cost adherence, control for decision-making or adjustments throughout the project? Those are the things that we'll look at and weigh which of these options would be the best for our project. So our team is continuing, sorry, was there?
Just as I'm trying to, kind of get a sip of water through the fire hydrant that's coming out here, are we anticipating doing the whole project as on one model or one RFP, or are we breaking it into sections? Because it's pretty massive. So can you help me understand how we would be sequencing it, over, like we're talking, 8 to 9 years of construction?
And that's part of what our review is going to look at, because again, it changes depending on which model you're going with. And it doesn't mean we need to necessarily go full as one. We could potentially do a hybrid where in the beginning we start off doing some traditional design bid build, but then have portions later on that go with a different model. Also, the phasing of the construction will vary based on each of those. If it's a traditional, you'll see more of the type of phasing that you're used to, where we pick logical chunks of the project and we do those as individual contract tenders. You might see a structure for one of the bridge upgrades to be done as a single contract, or maybe a stretch as a single contract. Versus the design build finance, it tends to be a lot of work up front to make sure you have those specifications right, and your procurement takes quite a while. But then they tend to construct in a more compressed station because they can innovate strategy and schedule. They can move within the larger corridors. One of the things we did though learn in speaking to to contractors through our market sounding exercise is that when you get into the design build finance model, there's a threshold where if you break it into too small a chunks, then the companies that do that type of work tend to not be as interested. So it's a balance of trying to say, if we go with the DBF, the design build finance, and we want to break it up, what's the right balance for how we phase that project and split it up? So again, those are all part of our decision-making process. Our goal is to really bring forward a recommendation that'll not just say, this is the model that we recommend, but this is how we think that phasing should happen.
And is there different ways of breaking it up, like in the sense of, I'm going to be really crass, but kind of above ground and underground, like, so the transit stations are, that's one sort of piece because you want consistency of design and all those sorts of things. And then, the pipes and pavement stuff is part of is there different ways in which they break it up?
Yes, through the chair, that'll play in as well. So for example, you mentioned the BRT platform design. So, if we went with one large project or split over two, one would go first, and that would establish what the design and the modular pieces of any station would be to be carried forward. If we went with more of the traditional, we end up breaking it up. We might actually just go out as a procurement model to a station platform designer and have them design and supply the materials. So as each contract goes forward, we've established what a stop looks like and where the materials are going to be coming from. So again, it's all kind of related to each other. We sort of have to go down that decision tree to figure out where we're going to end up in terms of phasing and how we split up the components of the project.
Does anyone else have questions that they would like addressed with this? Okay.
So just to wrap up the section of the presentation about the procurement models, so our team is still continuing to collect information to help us learn about the models. We've been reaching out to other municipalities, consultants, contracts, and finance experts, ones that have actually constructed rapid transit projects under different models so that we can learn from their experience. And we're starting to take what we've learned so far and try to shape it around the specifics of our project to see, again, what fits for London. So our goal is to bring forward a recommendation to council in the new year, and as we just discussed, along with some recommendations on how that will affect the phasing and staging of the project. So as I mentioned, this winter, a large part of our work will be on determining the most efficient procurement model for BRT, and we'll be starting to coordinate detailed design work with the other contracts that are happening downtown. So we're getting involved on the design teams for those projects so that we're taking an integrated approach. Construction of dedicated lanes is scheduled to start in 2020, aligning with the King Street Sewer Project to, again, minimize construction impacts in the core. This aligns with the Downtown Coordination of Works Strategy report that came to council in November of last year. And then construction will continue in 2022 under BRT's own contract. Again, at a high level, at this point, until we know our procurement model, we're still planning to try to start by heading east, followed by the north, the south, and then finally the west leg to wrap up by 2028. And this overall project timeline, the project plan aligns with funding timelines from our federal provincial partners. So the Government of Canada has communicated that projects that are approved under the public transit infrastructure stream need to be completed by March of 2028. So we're on track to meet each of the targets in this timeline and that final target as well. So that brings me to the end of my portion of the presentation. I know we took some questions along the way. I want to thank you for listening to a lot of information, and again, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Hey, do we have any questions? Oh, okay, Councillor Squire?
Two questions. First is, can you give me any information as to what the status is of negotiations with Western University and being able to go through campus? Because I have no information. I have zero information as to where we are on that, and I'm asked that constantly. So I wonder if you could provide me with any information.
Yeah, as I've said in previous times, that we're working to develop an agreement that will cover the logistics and the operational details of running a transit system across private property. And we've had meetings and drafts of an agreement that we're working together to kind of finalize. So at that point, we haven't finalized an agreement. As far as the routes and what's shown in the final environmental project report, where the routes go through campus and how we've aligned the stops around campus, those have been done in consultation with Western University. And so the design itself reflects an agreement of us on what the design will look like. And what we're working through now is the logistics of how it'll operate on private property.
All right, so can I take it from what you said that there's an actual draft agreement that is being exchanged back and forth between the City of London and Western University?
As I said, it's a negotiation that that staff and Western University are working on, and it's not something that I'm at liberty to get into specifics in this forum, but we're continuing to have discussions with them to work towards an agreement that will cover those logistical details.
In the BRT network report that I received as an LTC commissioner, there's an assumption in there that a new transit terminal is assumed to be in place on Western Road between Sarnia Road and Windermere Road. And I have to say that I received emails at one point from a constituent talking about a site. So again, you can't get into particulars, but is this something that's in part of this agreement with Western, or is there something else?
That's shown as part of the design that's been approved as a preliminary design in our final report. It was, again, in consultation with Western. We selected a site where we could locate a transit hub for local service to be able to connect, because under the proposed BRT system, local buses will not be coming through campus the way they do today. And so, and maybe I can pass it over to Ms. Pelechny to explain that further, but we need an option to be able to turn those buses around. And what's shown in the plan is what we've identified as the preferred location together with Western.
Okay, well, through the chair, maybe you can help me. What's this preferred location? Is this public, the preferred location for a terminal? Because I just would like to know that.
So it's shown on the plans that are included in the report. It's basically located on the east side of Western Road between Elgin and Wellington Drive, I believe. Again, I can pull up the map if you'd like me to try to actually bring up the, yep. Yeah, it's just on the east side of the road.
Councillor Usher?
Thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation. Very enlightening, and I really appreciate it at this time. We keep talking about the construction period through you, Madam Chair, is 8 years. But we got 4 legs, so to speak. Can you tell us at this time, because everybody out there think that we're going to have construction from this time to this time, 8-year period for the entire thing. And unless I'm misunderstanding this, I don't see that. So is each leg or portion of going to take up certain amount of that time so that from the start to the finish is the 8 years, or how is this going to be? Do you have any idea right now?
So again, that will vary based on the model that we use. So our goal, if we went with more of a traditional method, would be to try to aim to have a first leg, preferably the east leg, come online and be able to be operational once it's completed. But again, we probably wouldn't be starting at one end and just kind of working our way in order. We would need to, in order to complete 24 kilometers within 8 years under a traditional model, we'd have to be looking at multiple jobs happening in other areas of the city. But what we do, and what we've already started to look at, is if we went that model, how do we coordinate with other construction projects? How do we strategically pick where we put those projects that are happening at the same time so that we're allowing for flow of traffic in directions, for managing construction management, to look at those so that we're actually having a strategy about how we space that out. Alternatively, if we went with a design build finance method, one of the argued benefits of a DBF model is that it might take you longer to do your specifications, but what happens is you have a more compressed construction timeline because they're designing, building, it's all at the same time. So you might see a little bit more disruption at similar times throughout the city, but we're compressing it. So what we've heard from some of the people we heard in the market sounding is that under a DBF, they could potentially do the full project in 4 years as opposed to 8. But it would be 4 much more impactful years, but we get it done faster. So again, it really comes back to what's the right fit for us as a city? Do we want to be having construction spaced out over 8 years and staged so that it's kind of popping in different areas and being careful that way? Or do we want to sort of bite the bullet and say, let's get this done, let's get it done fast, but there's the model that we use for that approach. So again, we're going to lay all of those aspects out and can explain to you when we come back with a recommendation on each of those models and how it fit for our project and why we're recommending the one we are. So that's again why we're trying to collect as much information as we can about each of these models. There's pros and cons to each.
So thank you for that. It still makes me nervous because much of the negativity that I hear about this project, and I'm not saying all of it, but much of it is to do with an 8-year construction. People think that the street is going to be dug up for 8 years in front of their business. And, you know, I want to be sure at some point in time we're going to be able to console them to say that, hey, that leg from downtown to White Oaks is only going to be 2 or 3 years, and this one is going to be 2 or 3, or whatever it's going to be. I think that we need to get that information out as quickly as possible because that's not very clear. The other thing you mentioned about the dollars, through you, Madam Chair, at the end, and you talk about 8 years. Can you enlighten us what that really means? We're talking about the federal dollars, the provincial dollars there, and that there's a time limit for us to use that money. Is this what you're saying, what you're talking about?
As we're aware and what we know at this point for how the public transit infrastructure stream is going to work is that it has a cash flow for when the federal and provincial money would flow out, and that leads up to an end date, which is in 2028.
And that's exactly what I was getting at, because a lot of people think that you could use the money up until 2050, and we can't. And I just wanted you to explain it. And as we go along, we're going to have to explain it a little bit more. My last question at this point in time, and you didn't mention it here, but I'm hearing a lot about it. This is another aspect, and this may not be the avenue, but I'm going to ask it. Can you address anything about left turns at this point in time, or you want to do that at another function? A lot of people are very concerned. A lot of people who are against the project are concerned that they can't turn left. And I'm not sure if they quite understand that there are places that they can turn left. It's just that certain places they can't turn left. Can you address it at this point in time, or you'd prefer for that to be at another time? Through you, Madam Chair.
I'm happy to speak to how the left turn movements, if that's something that you want to discuss now. The way that our system is designed is that where the routes are center running BRT, there's a median that runs down the center of the lane, and it's about a curb height, so 6-inch height, about 1.5 meters wide. And what that does is that when we have center running lanes, if we didn't have a median there, then those dedicated dedicated bus lanes would actually become almost de facto left turn lanes. So people would use them as refuge while they wait to make a left turn. So to avoid that, what we do is at every signalized intersection, we provide a dedicated left turn U-turn lane where it'll have its own dedicated phase on the green light, almost like an advanced green that we have today. So anybody that wants to either turn left or access a driveway that's mid-block can pull into that left turn lane. When they get the dedicated signal, they'll be able to make a left or a U-turn and head back to the property that they're trying to reach in a safe and controlled manner. So when I look at situations like Wellington South at busy times, and you see people trying to make left turns without a safe controlled, this will allow them to, they don't have to worry about it, they can come up to that next green, make the U-turn and head back to McDonald's to get that Happy Meal.
Thank you. That satisfies me.
Do we have any questions on this side? Oh, Dean, go ahead.
Thank you, through you. First, I wanted to say how what good news it is that the Western has agreed to a route through campus, that it's on a map, and I realize that there's still details to be worked out. That's I think natural and expected, but I think it's worth noting that they seem to be on board and realizing the value of having a transit service in London, rapid transit, and that personally I don't believe there's any reason to believe that is not going to work out as an agreement with a very important institution in town. So I think that's great news. Also wanted to acknowledge and thank Councillor Usher for his question about construction period. I think that is in fact an important feature that because people hear it's 8 years of construction, they really do think it's going to be 8 years in front of my house or in front of my business. And I understand certainly why we're talking about the project in its totality, but I look forward to the time when we have a more detailed build out timeline so people can understand when they will be impacted and for what kind of much less amount of time than 8 years that will be. So did I understand that would be more likely to be estimated after we decide this procurement approach?
Yes, through the chair, we'll know more about how, once we decide on a procurement approach, we'll be able to provide you with then how that affects the staging and the approach that we take to constructing. Another point about, in terms of construction disruption, where people sometimes don't realize how many of the roads that are earmarked for bus rapid transit without rapid transit would be earmarked for construction anyways. Wellington South is a stretch that is overdue for both sewer works and road works. So construction is going to happen along most of these routes anyways within the next 10 years. Many of them are getting near the end of their pavement quality index and at the very least would need a resurfacing to be done. So we are coming in to do construction, but it's something that is part of city life every summer. And we, again, will always make sure that we try to manage that as best we can.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think too, it's also going to be very powerful if we can better explain that the integration approach that you've described tonight, where existing projects will have an end result, which is rapid transit ready, and really the extra construction impact by rapid transit in that area would really effectively be zero, because it was going to be built up anyway. And so the extra time and extra construction would be very, very minimal, if anything. So I think that that's another aspect of personalizing the construction impact that I think is going to be very important for people. Thanks.
Any further questions? Okay, go ahead.
So with that, I'll pass it over to Ms. Pelechny to
So what I'm here tonight to provide is an update to the London Transit's integration strategy with respect to integrating the local transit network with the rapid transit corridors. This is a study that was initially done in 2016. What we did just recently is we brought the consultants back to just do an update based on a number of things that have changed since the 2016 report was done. It changed with respect to the planning on the BRT. Things like we now know that we've got center running lanes on some corridors. The downtown couplet changed when we were back in 2016, that didn't exist. We just talked about it earlier, the fact that Western is looking to reduce local service on campus once BRT is up and running. So we needed to relook at the routes that we were planning to have on campus and also look at how we would be utilizing that new transit terminal on Western Road. So essentially, we just brought the consultants back to do an update on that plan to make sure that everything was consistent with where we've landed with the decisions on BRT. So what we did was we went out and did another round of engagement with both the public and LTC operators and frontline staff, just to confirm that the rapid transit integration principles that were included in the 2016 plan still made sense, that we still had buy-in for that. We confirmed the design principles. And then again, we looked at we also updated the plan to include the draft service changes that we've got going forward for 2019, so that our new starting point is actually 2019 versus the 2016 that it was in the past. And then we've incorporated some other small changes to the proposed 2035 network based on feedback. The report that the commission approved last week also included a very high level financial plan and estimates. So in terms of the design principles, what we've got here is the 6 design principles that were included when we looked at when we looked at what changes needed to be made to the network, and the priorities that are on the slides in red are what came back from the stakeholder feedback. So the number one priority from both the public and LTC operators and frontline staff was to ensure that we can serve effective operations. So we need to make sure that the entire network continues to operate effectively. That was the number one priority that we heard. The number two was tied between the ability to maintain connections and looking at minimizing duplication. So, you know, obviously in areas where we've got rapid transit running on a corridor, it doesn't make sense to have a whole lot of local service. We may want to have some because local service provides more frequent stops, but we don't want the same level of local service that we've got on those corridors now. So things like that. In terms of maintaining connections, one of the key principles that we looked at is any route that would be feeding one of the rapid transit corridors will have no more than double the headway of the rapid transit corridor. So if we talk about the L corridor running at a 5-minute frequency, the routes connecting with that corridor will have no more than 10. What that means is somebody that needs to make a transfer, the longest that they would ever wait is 5 minutes. So what you're trying to do is shorten that transfer time to make the trip still make sense. The other things are there, and again, the priorities are there. We talked about providing frequent service, ensuring directness of travel, and that one, although it's a number 5 priority, that is something that we also considered. There has been some misconception out in the public that every route is going to be redirected to feed the rapid transit corridors. That's not the case at all. There's a number of routes in the 2035 network that don't touch the rapid transit corridor at all. We look at the origin and destination of our riders, where they want, where do they want to start, where do they want to go, and if it doesn't make sense to take them to that corridor and force a transfer, then that's not what we'll be doing. So that was a key consideration as well. So this map is essentially the transit network map at 2035. And the circles are the BRT stops. But if you just look at the map as an image, every route that's green on this map is going to see frequency and alignment changes between 2020 and 2035 as a result of the update of the transit network. So just as a visual, you can see that significant changes are planned for the transit network system-wide, and that's something, again, there's a misconception in the public that, we often hear, I don't live on the BRT corridor, so there's really nothing in this for me. If we look at this map as a visual, you can see that essentially every route, with the exception of a very few, will see frequency improvements over that period. The routes that are in blue will see changes just in frequency but not alignment, and the ones in purple, which there are only a couple, will see changes in alignment. And again, when we talk about alignment, I talked earlier about directness of travel, or some routes right now that are long meandering routes. What we're looking to do is split them possibly into 2 routes and make shorter trips and allow people to transfer to finish, that kind of thing. So again, this map is more intended just as a visual to provide the level of impact that we're looking at, and the amount of changes that we'll be looking at doing to the system, the entire network going forward. So in terms of overall changes, this graph just essentially is intended to set out the service hour changes over the period from essentially 2019 is draft, but from 2019 to 2035. So what you'll see is approximately a net new service hours of 150,000 hours. Now, when I say net new, that's because a lot of the hours that you see for the rapid transit corridors are hours that we're already providing service. If we look at, for example, our Route 90 that essentially runs down Richmond and then down Wellington, obviously that local service isn't going to operate anymore. So some of those hours will be utilized for BRT, some will be reallocated into the frequency improvements that we talked about on the larger map. So the net new is 150, but there's a lot more than 150,000 hours worth of change that will happen system-wide. And again, just a very high level estimates again from 2017 to 2035 in terms of how we see the system continuing to operate. We see boardings per capita going from 58 to 69, boardings per revenue service hour going from 37 to 39, and our total revenue cost ratio remaining somewhat consistent, moving up slightly from 49.8 to 50.8. That is the last piece of the integration, but I just have one last slide here that just some highlights of what we're looking at, what the commission approved in the draft 2019 service plan. All of these things have been incorporated into the framework that I just talked about. So we're looking at extending the service day to 1 a.m. Monday through Saturday. Currently, our conventional services stop operating at midnight, so we're looking at extending that to 1 a.m. on key routes, not on every route initially. In 2018, we extended Sunday service to start at 7 a.m. versus 9 a.m. on 11 routes. We're looking at expanding that to the rest of the routes in 2019. We're also looking at introducing 2 new express routes, the 93, which will connect White Oaks Mall to Masonville Mall via Warncliffe, and the 94, which will connect Argyle Mall and Western University via Dundas and Western Warncliffe. We're also looking at introducing a community bus service in the Berkshire Village area, a number of adjustments to route alignments in effort to simplify the network, and frequency and schedule improvements on many routes to address on-time performance and overcrowding. With that, I would be pleased to answer any questions.
We'll start with questions on this side. Councillor Hewart?
I'll just say thank you. As an employer in the community that has to get people to work on Sunday morning, thank you. 7 a.m. works most of the time, and so it's very much appreciated for those that don't work the traditional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So I'll just throw a thank you to that. I think the express routes is really a good add as well, and I did confer with the commissioner to my left here, and he tells me you're also still working on the industrial area things. And I think it's interesting, and I will ask a question. All of this is really good, but no new members of council, just one member of the public, and so much of this information is lost. You know, a express route from Argyle Mall to Western, you know, that's significant. From Masonville to White Oaks Mall, so I can compare the price of shoes in Masonville on the same day. That's tremendous, right? Amazing what you could do on Bay days, right? You know, both Bay, you know, it's remarkable. These are really good interim steps. They won't get us to where we want to do. And I calculated, going back to your previous slide, you know, I'll be 74 when those service hours come in 2035. So I'm hoping there'll be, you know, room for my whatever mobility devices I need on those buses too, Kelly, and you can sit beside me on the bus and, you know. But I think these are things that we have heard over the last 6 months and the last couple of years that Londoners have been crying for. And I really want to say that in the positive sense. I want to thank the commission for hearing that and tweaking, redesigning, and not, obviously we can't wait a decade for it to get better, but this will make it better and it'll be positive. So I see a number of things that I have heard over the years from many people, from employers, who are operating businesses on off-peak hours that are very, very positive. So I want to thank you for that. So now I do have a question. So the question's this, all of this, and Ms. Ramsey, your presentation and LTC presentation as well. We have a problem. The problem is a communications problem. Everyone is locked into these boxes, mental categories, where you know, as someone, we talk about in heart stuff about the hardening of the arteries. Well, we have the hardening of the categories. And it's BRT, and it's this box. And often that box isn't appropriate. It's not well understood. And so the question I have for our team as a whole is, how are we going to rebrand this thing so that we can have a new conversation with the community around so much that has gone, because there's been so much misconception and misinformation, and there's so much detail in it. So I'd like to, that's my central question. How are we going to restart the conversation with the community? And I use the word rebrand that. So that's my question.
I can start, and then certainly Jenny can jump in, but I probably should have included that in my presentation. One of the pieces when we went to the commission is we talked about exactly that, and the need to get the messaging that I just talked about tonight out to the community for people to understand and to try and address a number of those misconceptions. We at the commission are working on a document that you know, a booklet that will be available, but we're also looking at utilizing our website, social media, that kind of thing to get that information out. We'll obviously be working with the SHIFT team to make sure that the, you know, that the messaging is consistent. But from the commission's perspective, what we feel, the message that we feel has been lost is that we're talking about a transformation of the entire transit network. We're not just talking about 2 corridors. We're talking about an entire system that is going to work better for everyone once it's all in place. And that's the document that we're looking to work on, again, in cooperation with Jenny's group, to make sure that we've got, you know, that we've got the BRT pieces included in that.
I guess just to build on that, again, just as we're moving through and as we complete the EA process, it doesn't mean that the work that we've been trying to do to educate the public on the citywide benefits and the overall benefits of the system and how, even just how it works. I think there's still even just misconception about where it's running and you know, are these super speed buses with rocket ships? You know, it's amazing how when you get out in the community, you talk to people, they're really, we love having that opportunity to talk one-on-one with people, because you can really understand what is it about the project that you don't understand and how can we help you with that. And so that is still a top priority for us throughout the project. We also, going forward, will start to build communication strategies for each of the next phases. So we're going to be, as we head into detailed design, the way we communicate and how we outreach with people is going to change. And once we get into construction, it'll change again. And we're going to have really clear set out strategies for how that communication will work. And so that's our goal, is to be able to create those plans as well.
And so part of it is, and I know everyone's been working really hard. I totally get that. But somehow, and I, you know, while I was not running, I did spend time knocking on doors with a number of candidates. And I was really quite amazed, no matter how hard we've tried to communicate, that this is and I totally am on board with you, Kelly, this is a transformation. This is not BRT this is not an add-on. You know, it's not like your WordPress site where you add a widget. This is not a widget that we're adding. This is a system-wide transformation. And the only way I've been able to communicate it, being a Torontonian by birth, is, can you imagine Toronto without a Bloor line? And then people go, oh, that would be awful, right? And so how do we restart the conversation? I'm not sure it's another booklet, to be honest with you, Kelly, because the message is not getting through that this is not a widget that we're adding in, that this is a system overhaul. And so that's all of what we've talked about tonight is fantastic, and it's well done. And I know how hard you're all working, and it's comprehensive and it's complicated. And it's rare that I'll ever say that it's complicated, okay? But it is complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. So how do we have that conversation and simplify it in some way that it's understandable? Because that's where our gap has been. And I've talked with candidates. I've talked with now councillors-elect, and they still don't get that it's not a widget. And that's problematic, because those would be the people that would be most and best informed of the general population who aren't necessarily sitting around this conversation on a day-to-day basis. So I know in other municipalities, they've rebranded it and they've called it something different. How do we and you may not have the answer, and that's okay. This is my last chance to give you a question, and I'll come back to you at a public participation meeting, but I'll be up there. But we got to restart that conversation with Londoners somehow. We need to rebrand, and we need to start the narrative again in a new, fresh way.
Any further questions on this side? Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. It's pretty exciting, the 2019 changes. As I was talking to people, some of the problems that they said we've had was riders left behind because the bus is full, you've addressed that. Insufficient frequency, you've addressed that. Insufficient hours of operation, you've addressed that. Now, I was at the meetings where we were looking at getting out to the industrial sections, and that was another really big thing that's been said. So I will ask, Deputy Mayor Hubert brought it up. How is that coming? Because that was something that I've been promising people, say, I know this exists. I know they're going to come to me and they're going to ask for money and I'm just going to give it to them. I shouldn't have said that and been so easy about it, but it's a pretty sure thing. Let us know.
Sure. So in the 2019 plan, we are looking at some route extensions and deviations into the Exeter Road area. We've got a route that runs out there now that we believe we can make some modifications and to provide some service. In the Innovation Park and Sovereign Road area, we're looking at starting an alternative service delivery model where we would look to work with third parties to provide trips into those areas from either Fanshawe or Argyle Mall. So again, with a taxi company, Uber, whoever it is that wants to participate, but essentially bringing people on transit to those kind of terminus points and then carrying on into those areas with a third party model. And we're hoping to have that up and running early in 2019.
Wow, that's fantastic and exciting. We're going to try some different models and some collaboration. The last one, the huge challenge, it says it is the poor reliability because of the trains. Now, I know there's nothing you can do about that. However, you might have actually adjusted some routes to mitigate that a little bit. And if that's the case, then please let us know, because that would be an exciting thing to hear too, although I'm not going to hold you to that.
I can say it's funny. We earlier this year, we also enhanced our corporate social media and our use of Twitter to provide real-time updates for transit services and delays. And that's been up and running for 6 or 7 months now. And I can say we've had to send out 2 tweets in that entire time because of a bus that's been delayed by a train. So trains really, at the end of the day, don't impact our services unless it's a train that's stuck on a track for a significant period of time. Most of the frequencies that we've got on those corridors are, I mean, it may impact one bus, but it's not to the point where it's backing up the entire corridor for an extended period of time. So trains aren't really the issue. In terms of our on-time performance right now, obviously we've all been talking about it. I think there's about 4 routes in our entire network that aren't either traveling through a construction zone or on detour right now, just given the massive amounts of construction that are going on. So obviously that has impacts on our schedule adherence, and that's really what we're struggling with right now.
Okay, thank you. But again, good work on this 2019 plan. It addresses most of the things that people are really looking to have fixed.
Councillor Squire.
Through you, Madam Chair. My questions aren't, first of all, I supported the 2019 draft service plan, so I'm pleased about that, and I'm pleased we've reached this point through council contributing more money to the commission. My questions are more about the future and about our financial estimates for the future. And I know we were presented with a document that has projections of numbers in 2035. And I'm not going to be here in 2035. Not many of us will be here in 2035. Okay. Can I carry on, or are you guys going to keep? Thanks. what I'm interested in is as a counselor who's going to serve, I know now I'm going to be here for 4 more years. How am I going to judge how well we're doing in the system with these investments of money? In other words, how am I going to get measures that I can look at, whether I'm a London Transit Commission member, I'm just a counselor, to know if we're moving towards that 2035 number? Because I know what those 2035 numbers are based on now. I've done a lot of looking at it, and I have to say that for me, they are an educated guess. They are an educated guess of where we will be in 17 years. I'm really more interested in where we're going to be in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. Are we going to be on track to increase our ridership and increase our revenue so that the system is sustainable? So you've described this document as a high-level financial document. When am I going to see something that's more detailed, something that provides me with what the system is going to be, how the system is going to be performing in 2020, 2021, 2024? This document has taken away any interim date. It used to have a 2024 date. Now it's just, here's your number on 2019. You got to wait till 2035. And that doesn't really work for me as someone who's really concerned about the operating costs of this system. So I'm hoping you can help me.
Sure. So you are correct. In the 2016 initial document, there were additional benchmark years. Those were based on the planned implementation of the rapid transit corridors coming online. So that was based on assumptions back in 2016. And I believe back then we thought the North Corridor was potentially going to be the first. So things have changed. Because when we were updating this, we still weren't sure. As you've heard this evening, we weren't sure what the phasing was going to be. It was difficult to come up with in 4 years from now, this section of this corridor will be up and running. What we asked Dylan to do was just take it out to 2035 as a first step. But as you're aware, Dylan's coming back to the commission in February with the next 5-year service strategy based on this document. So what they're going to do is take this document, pare it down and say, okay, based on what we know from rapid transit, where we think we know that, the King Street piece, so where we think probably it's going to be the East Corridor that will be up and running first. What are our priorities from a network-wide approach for the next 5 years? And again, as you're aware as a commissioner, each year those service plans come forward. We provide the commission with ridership estimates, revenue estimates, and everything that goes with that. And then we report back on whether or not they were successful. So those are the measures that the commission will receive year over year. So in February, the commission will receive the service plan from 2020 to 2024. And that will be broken out by year. So you'll be able to see by year the service hours that we'd be looking to add, the planned ridership that we would be hoping to attract based on that. The other piece that will be incorporated as well, coming to the commission the draft is coming in November, the final in January, is the ridership growth strategy. So there'll be a number of strategies in there that will also be incorporated into the business planning cycle going forward. So having said all of that, it will all be rolled into the commission's next 4-year business plan, the ridership growth strategies, as well as the service planning strategies, and all of that will be measured through our annual reporting process.
I could just follow up on that, because I looked at all of the source material for Dylan. I looked at the report that they looked at to make these kind of things, which was a 2007 American report that talked about growth of rapid transit ridership. I'm just wondering if Dylan is prepared at this point in time to look at Canadian examples of what's happened in rapid transit, bus rapid transit. And I'm surprised that as I've talked to people involved, and I mentioned Winnipeg, which has had challenges, people say to me, well, we haven't looked at Winnipeg, we haven't really looked at what's happened there in terms of their drop in ridership and their challenges in terms of operating revenue. Is that something that you're prepared to look at, or Dylan's prepared to look at? More Canadian examples of how BRT has worked?
Certainly, I think we're always willing to look at that. I think it's important, though, in the Dylan report, the properties that they looked at was only one piece of that entire model. There were a number of things that they considered when they tried to come up with a ridership. I'll agree with you. When you're estimating that 17 years out, it is an educated guess. I don't think there's, if somebody can estimate and be that accurate, I think they'd be very wealthy at some point in the future. So there is a certain amount of guesswork involved when you're estimating that far out. I will say, though, we know of some very, very close by local experiences. We've got Grand River, who in 2018 started to implement their service changes, similar to the ones we talked about tonight, to start to integrate with the LRT lines that are supposed to be coming online in December of 2018. They are forecasting a 5% growth in ridership in 2018 over 17 because of those changes and enhancements that they've made. Brampton, as you're aware, has continued to implement their Zoom services. In 2016, they had a 10% growth over 2015. In 2017, they saw 18% growth over 16, and they're predicting somewhere between 15 and 18% growth again in 2018 over 17. So they're seeing so much growth they can't keep up. So there's two local examples of, of systems that are in different phases of where we're planning on going that are seeing significantly higher ridership experience than even the numbers that Dylan included in their assessment. So there certainly are local cases, and you know what, there's probably ones out there that aren't doing so well too. And I mean, that's all got to be incorporated, but what I would suggest is the approach that we have used in the past and we plan to continue to use going forward. You're aware, there's many times where we'll come back to the commission and say, that service change that we put in over here, it's not performing the way we wanted, and we need to do something about that. So we'll tweak the route or we'll adjust the frequency because we're not seeing the ridership returns we're getting. That's continues to be the plan going forward. The plans haven't changed going forward, that just because it's in this long-term plan, we're just going to put that in there and leave it there. It's going to continue to be monitored to make sure that it's still meeting the expectations for ridership and revenue recovery. And if it's not, it will be adjusted, just like it happens today.
That I really look forward to, and I'm glad there's going to be more detailed on that. I'm not going to agree with you sitting here without looking at the numbers you've quoted to me that they're accurate. This is, quite frankly, this has happened to me before, where somebody came here from Winnipeg and told me certain numbers, 12% ridership growth, and they turned out, quite frankly, to be inaccurate. So I want to be really careful about that. All I want is something to come back that enables me to measure the success of what we're doing. And if you're going to do that and you're confident in doing that and presenting that, I will be happy to receive it. But I will also be keeping track and making sure that this is not open-ended, let's spend all the money and not keep track of performance. That's all I'm asking for.
Councillor Usher.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't know where to begin now because so much has been discussed that they've taken a lot of my limelights out of the way, but I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to answer. And first, I want to thank LTC for this presentation, and Kelly in particular, because a lot of this stuff is evolution. We've been experiencing these concerns for years, and now they're coming to fruition. When it comes to transit, you don't snap your finger and everything happens. It happens gradually. And over the years, we have consistently improved the transit system. I've been in the transit system for 14 years, except the last 4 years. And we consistently improve it. And this that I'm seeing here is a vast improvement. What I'm trying to say, though, is a lot of these things have been coming to us over the years. And now we are saying we've reached the point now where we could do them. For example, the extended service to 1 a.m. on Monday to Saturday. That's been asked for many, many years. Now we are getting it. And the Sunday service, same, everything here. But there are some things that I don't see here and I didn't see on the map, and I need to get some clarification on it. And first of all, it's to do with the outlying areas, what we call the industrial areas. I know that you're making an effort, the LTC is making an effort to serve those industrial areas, and I have a lot of concern about serving those areas and how we're going to serve it and the cost of how we're going to serve it and how we're going to share that cost if we're going to share it at all. But I don't quite understand how we're going to get south of the 401, how we're going to get east of Highbury. I didn't see that on the map. Could you just address that a little bit for me? Because those are some of the industrial areas that I have heard the cry over the years.
As I said earlier, we do have plans in 2019 to work with third-party delivery options, so Uber, taxi, whoever it is that wants to work with us to provide service. It would be east of Highbury into the Sovereign Road and Innovation Park areas to provide service. So essentially, people would get off the bus at either Argyle Mall or Fanshawe and transfer into that third-party service vehicle that would take them directly to their place of employment. And then same thing on the way home, would pick them up at their place of employment and take them to that closest transit terminal, and then they would finish their trip. So those plans are underway for early 2019. We do have some route deviations, as I said, to go on to the other side of the 401. They are included in the 2019 service plan in the detailed document. It is something that we're continuing to work on. In the post-2019 framework, there are a number of areas in the city that are highlighted as what we're calling potential alternative service delivery model areas, meaning areas where the traditional transit route just doesn't make sense. The ridership isn't there to run a transit route on a regular frequency, but we need to look at other ways to get people in those areas, connected to the transit route and able to utilize the transit system. So that is incorporated in the long-term plans.
And I'm really glad to hear that, Madam Chair, because this has come up quite a few times during the last campaign. Lots of people are saying that they're going to do this and they're going to do it. This is not an easy task. We've been jostling with this for many, many years, and I'm glad to see that we are coming finally to some kind of conclusion. It may not be the final, but at least we're getting there. But one of the reasons I'm interested in this is because way back 18 years ago when we started the land servicing area strategy, I should say, all of this area that you're seeing along Highbury and along Bradley and so on, they're all part of the land servicing strategy. And we sell them land and they develop and they create jobs. And some of those people are some of the people who some people are claiming they would like jobs out there and they need to get out there. And that's one of the reasons that I'm consistent to bring it up. But I know that it's an expensive scenario and we need the people out there to be part of this. My other question, two other quick questions. If you could bring up that map for me again, the one that shows the blue lines and the purple lines and so on. I am not so sure that I'm reading this right. For example, I'm looking down in Warrencliffe, Exeter, Southdale area there, and I see blank. I don't see that whole triangle that you see down there that is just incorporated into Ward 12. I don't see any kind of service. That thing is going to be a massive area of residential area. It's already half filled and they're going to build up a whole lot of buildings out there. And I don't see any green lines or anything out there. I can't walk in there. It's too big. Is there a proposal that we don't see that will be happening in there? Can you address that? I'm just, there may be other areas. That's the one that I'm very familiar with. That's why I'm asking.
Yes, so that's one of the areas that has been identified as a potential either alternative service delivery area or a potential future growth area. So again, when we looked at this this network, we looked at where growth is occurring, where it's likely to occur, where we know that development is coming and it's likely to result in the level of intensification that it would make sense to put a transit route. So where you see lines, those are actually where we believe, routes will make sense. But on those areas in the periphery, that's where we're saying we need to look at alternative options, again, to try and collect people in those areas and get them into the network so that they could continue their trip elsewhere.
So, Madam Chair, just because I see a purple line coming down White Oaks Road and across to Exeter, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to go into those areas, right? In the future, as you build up in that area, because right now, I think they need buses in there, but it's not being shown. It's something that will have to be examined. This is what that means?
So the purple line that you see on White Oaks and Exeter is an existing transit route. So the purple line is existing, but you're right, there's nothing that comes off of that route right now, but that's not to say that that route may not be extended or another branch may be added to that route as we see development occur and the need arise.
Because by 2035, Madam Chair, there's going to be a multitude of residents in there. There's going to be a multitude of residents down between Exeter and Dingman. And those people are going to need bus services before we say 2035, but by 2025, maybe even 2022, it's going to begin to build. So I'll leave that question there. My last question is I want to pick up on something that Councillor Hubert was talking about, and it's to do with the communication of this. I found that a lot of people don't quite, and you know, I think we've got a smart population out there, but this information is not getting to them. We started this thing out way back in 2006, when I'm talking about BRT as such. And when we thought we had everything covered, we suddenly found out that, boom, everybody were not there. Everybody were not hearing the story. And I think that Kelly said that we're going to put out a booklet. I want to be sure that whatever information we put out is very simplified, because if we make it too complex, people will not want to read it in the first place, and even if they read it, they will not understand it. We've got to make this so that people will want to read it. First of all, that they will get it. And when they get it, that they will want to read it. And when they read it, that they will understand it and appreciate it. So I want to leave us with that, because I think that that's very, very important from this point on. This is my last opportunity to address this. And I don't want to have to explain this anymore after this. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Pelechny. And thank you, Mrs. Ramsey. Can I have a mover and a seconder to accept this update? Councillor Usher and Councillor Van Holst, all in favor? Thank you. And moving on to the consent item 3.1, fourth report of the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group. Is it mover? So Councillor Hubert and Commissioner Shepherd, all in favor? Thank you. And moving on to items for discussion, these 4 items are an addition by Councillor Van Holst, and he's going to talk to them, and then we can decide as a group where we want to go with that.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and through you to my colleagues. The BRT plan we had was, we asked our staff to design this with a potential future upgrade to an LRT system, because that's what we thought the future was going to be like. However, we're seeing some interesting developments in transit technology as we look into the future, and we can also see them happening in the present. So I think it was important to just see how things are developing, because that might affect how we plan the evolution of our BRT system. So some of the interesting things going on are the bus hailing application being used by Belleville. So they're testing that out this year. I understand the test is going pretty well. I believe it's very similar to the Uber Pool app, which if you're not familiar with that, it's not something that's here in London yet, but how that one works, if you're willing to share your cab with somebody, you can get a lower price, and what the app will do is figure out where you are and where you're going, and if there's somebody on the way, it'll pick them up and drop them off, and then drop you off, or the other way around, depending on who's got the route. While you're in the car together, the price is lower. But what's interesting about this app is that it's interactive, and it's also adaptive. So it's figuring out in real time where people are, where they want to go, and managing and creating a route with that information through an artificial intelligence. So Belleville has decided to do this, and they describe it as they're being at the forefront of a revolutionized transit service through the introduction of an on-demand bus hailing system. And as I understand it, they have a route in the evening is when they're testing this out, but there'll be a loop, and they put 2 buses on it, and one just goes around like the regular bus, and the other one I think it basically just waits for somebody to call it, and then it comes directly to you, not necessarily around the loop, and then drops you directly off at one of the stops. And unless somebody else has also called, and it will pick them up on the way. So it's working in that way. So we see transit developing in that way. We're seeing we may see less and less of actual routes happening. Of course, there'll be corridors that people will want to travel down all the time. However, the next one to describe is the test of the driverless shuttles in Edmonton last month.
Sure, let's address one at a time. So 4.1, what exactly is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for a report back or just a?
Oh, you know what? I'm actually, Counselor, and through the chair, I was just gonna, if I can touch on these three, and then really the only thing to address is number 4.4. So this is kind of for your information. I'll tell you those, draw my conclusion, and maybe we can ask for something on 4.4.
Councillor Usher, did you have anything to add to that?
I was just wondering where we wanted to go with this. Is this to replace BRT or these 4 items or 3 items? Because I thought we're here just for BRT, and I don't want to lose Cora, but I really need to go soon. So could we help me understand, is this an idea to replace BRT through you, Madam Chair?
Counselor, this is the evolution of transit. So quickly, if you will, let me describe that to you. And then where I hope to go is to ask that we can reconsider an evolution to LRT into some of the newer technologies that are coming on, because this is part of the implementation
Councillor Parker's point of order.
Thank you. So we can all go back to the terms of reference of what this group is, and I think that where the good counselor is going is very much departed from the terms of reference of this working group. And just while I have the floor, I can tell you that the city of Belleville is much smaller when it comes to transit. The ridership there is very scant. I used to live up there for several years. So I don't see that where we're going is appropriate in terms of the terms of reference of this working group. I do think that the good counselor should bring this forward the next term of council to the Civic Works Committee and get that information through that. And it will be very much in line with the terms of reference of that.
Sorry, any further comment or question? Councillor Hubert, did you have something?
I was going down the same road, and I think, not to in any way dismiss the suggestions of the councillor, I just don't think, and quite frankly, a number of us have commitments that we need to go to, Madam Chair. And I think one of the challenges here is, rather than listening to the councillor talk about the good research that he's done, I think this is Civic Works, and these are great ideas, no question about it. It's a fascinating field, and perhaps if this actually working group goes to Civic Works. This report goes to Civic Works. If the councillor wanted to wrap all of these into a motion that said something to this effect, that we would ask staff through Civic Works to report out on bus hailing, driverless shuttles, his 4 items here, I think that would be great. But I just don't think it's material for us tonight, without anything in front of us, nor a staff report or anything to go on about these particular innovations that are happening, no matter how fascinating they are.
Any further comments on this side? Councillor Squire?
I think the one point is, if the one issue that I had some interest in, I have to say, is 4.4, which is an expert on the autonomous field, because I've heard the word mentioned many times today about misinformation, people don't understand, which I won't comment on talking to people in that way, but I would rather we not say that. But this is a really good opportunity if we got to this point of saying, look, there's been a lot of discussion in the community about autonomous vehicles being a replacement for bus rapid transit. And I don't think there would be anything wrong with having someone come here and explain, is that a valid thing for people to be talking about? Because when I'm in the community and people say that to me, why are you building a bus rapid transit system when it's all going to be replaced with autonomous vehicles? I'd like to hear from someone, not biased one way or the other, who explains how autonomous vehicles fit into what we're doing as a bus rapid transit system. That's a completely legitimate thing, I think, to be presented at some time to this committee. So I would be really supportive of that because it would help me in my job as a councillor. The rest, I tend to agree. If we're just going to talk about these issues, I think this is probably not the proper forum.
Okay, Councillor Van Holst, would you be willing to put that, the 3 items or the 4 items into a motion to take to Civic Works?
I don't think I need anything from this committee to move forward with that. I'm disappointed that we don't want to have a conversation about it. It seemed like this was the place to do it. And we've had, of course, experts come here before. It seemed like a place to talk about this. Certainly, this could be some of the technologies that would be used to interact with our bus rapid transit. So the autonomous vehicles, the advantage of them is, of course, that it doesn't require a driver to be there all the time. They can wait until somebody, for instance, on Classic Drive, I had many residents say, you know, I bought this home on Classic Drive because I knew there was a bus route here. And that's why they purchased it. And now it's a big inconvenience for them otherwise. So here's the kind of thing that, you know, a small shuttle like the one in Edmonton could be in that area. If somebody needed it, it could take them to the routes that we have established and were shown here. And that could be a way to integrate with this, you know, and would be important too, because also we've got an autonomous vehicle innovation network happening. This is a real thing and an important thing. And London is responsible for that. We could actually help with this by doing that. So there's ways for these kinds of new technologies to interact with the BRT plan if we go through with the BRT plan. So this could be an adjunct to that, to the councillor's statement. This could potentially be a replacement for that in the future. Okay. So there's my points, but I won't thank you, but I'll just say that I'll take this forward to the next council. You can be certain.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Okay, so if there's no other additional business, okay. And a mover and a seconder to adjourn, Councillor Usher, Councillor Park, all in favor? Thank you, everyone.